Welcome, everybody. Hope you're having a great weekend so far, and I'm so glad that you've included Parker Hill in your weekend. And for some of you, you may be here today for the very first time, and right now you're realizing that we are kind of a different kind of church. We're a multi-site church, which means that we meet in 3 different locations, even though we are one church. And so every Sunday, the way that we stay connected is we share the same teaching by video at all 3 campuses. So let me start by giving a big shout out to those of you who are attending at our Clark Summit location, those of you in Wilkes-Barre, and those of you who are watching online. So good to have you here today for week number 2 in this series called Insomnia. And during this series, we've been talking about some of those issues in life that just create anxiety and worry for us, those big questions that we think about when we're wide awake at 2 o'clock in the morning staring at the ceiling. And so we began this series last week by talking about this question: why is this world so messed up? And we talked about the fact that the world is messed up, but this is not the final chapter in the story. And the way that we avoid all the stress of living in this messed up world is to focus our attention on our hope, on a greater reality. And we talked about that last week. And today we're continuing this series with a second question. And it's this question: will my kids turn out okay? And these 2 questions are really interconnected, aren't they? Because if you're a parent, if you love your kids and you want the best for your kids, you look around and you realize that this world is messed up and that you've got to raise your kids in this messed up world. And the truth is, we live in a world that seems to be doing its dead level best to pollute the hearts and minds of our kids and to turn them in the wrong direction. And so if you're a parent, you worry. You worry about the choices your kids are going to make. You worry about the path that they're going to take. I mean, there are times when you wrestle with this question and it keeps you up at night. And the question is, will my kids turn out okay? But even beyond that, I think for some parents, they not only wrestle with this question, but they also wrestle with their own parenting. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes we think to ourselves, am I doing the right things? And am I doing enough? Am I giving my kids what they're going to need to navigate life? Or am I just giving them things to talk about with their therapist someday? So we even worry about our parenting. So let me just right up front relieve you of some of that stress. And if you're a parent, let me just tell you, you will make mistakes. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. You will fail at times. In fact, if you've ever failed as a parent, let me just tell you that you are not alone. In fact, I can prove it to you. A couple of years ago, Jimmy Fallon, the host of The Tonight Show, put out an invitation to all his fans to go on Twitter and to share stories about times when they messed up as parents or times when their parents messed up, using the hashtag #ParentFail. And people sent in some great ones. Let's just share a few with you, just to encourage you if you're a parent. First one: I put sunscreen on my 4 kids, but one came back burnt. Turns out I lathered one kid up twice. So you got one kid that's real greasy and real pale, Here's the next one. I forgot to fill the piñata with candy at my daughter's birthday party. Oh, man, that is sad. Next one. I once got a text from my mom where "you're amazing" autocorrected to "you're adopted." Like you told me by text. I like this next one. My dad told me the ice cream truck played music when all the ice cream was gone. That's not a parent fail, that's a parent win right there, in my opinion. All right, one last one. My dad is a horrible speller. One Christmas, my sister got a present from Satan. I think I'll open that one later. Here's the truth, and just embrace this truth if you're a parent. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. You will fail, you will struggle from time to time, which is why every day we need to invite God into our families, which is why we need to depend on God himself, why we need to make him the center of our families, because we just can't do it on our own. Now, throughout this series, we've been addressing these different questions and answering these questions by focusing on a particular part of the Bible, the book of Psalms. Now, the book of Psalms is right in the middle of the Bible. And there are 150 of them. The Psalms are Jewish poetry that was written about 2,500 years ago. And then some of these Psalms were put to music, and they actually became the songs that the people of Israel would sing as part of their worship. And so today we're going to focus on Psalm 127. If you have a Bible, you can turn there. Just bring that up on your Bible app on your phone. Psalm 127, and under that number, there's a little descriptor. It says that this psalm was written by Solomon and that it's a song of ascents. And I just want to explain that to you a little bit because it is kind of important. During the year, there were 3 different times in the year, 3 different Jewish festivals when the Jewish people would typically make their way to Jerusalem to celebrate that festival. And whenever you went to the city of Jerusalem, because of its elevation, no matter where you were coming from, you always had to go up to get there. You had to ascend to a higher elevation. And so the Jewish people had 15 of these psalms that they would sing as they made their way to Jerusalem, as they made their way up, as they ascended. And so these were called a song or a psalm of ascent. It was kind of like in the old days when you went on a road trip, you would sing songs as a family. That was before iPads and portable DVD players. But this was a song of ascent. And so they would sing this together as they were making their way up to the city of Jerusalem. Now let me tell you what it says. I won't sing it for you. I'll just read it. It says this: "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves. Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them." Now, I think there's some incredible truth in those 5 verses there in Psalm 127. But before we jump in, let me just make 3 statements right up front, 3 clarifying statements. The first one would be this, that this isn't a message just for parents, okay? Because I recognize on every campus we have teenagers, we have people who are single and have no plans to get married or have kids in the near future. We got people who are empty nesters. And if you're in one of those categories, you might already be thinking, well, you know what, this doesn't apply to me. And maybe you're already tuning me out. But I don't want you to do that. I want you to be fully engaged for several reasons. Number one, because even though you don't have a family now, if you're young, you may have a family someday. And it's always good to be thinking and preparing for when that day comes. But number 2, and perhaps more importantly, I would say this, that raising up the next generation is not just an assignment that's given to parents. It's given to the entire community. You see, if you're a follower of Christ, you're actually a part of 2 families. You're a part of a biological family. That would be the people who share your last name and share a common DNA in most cases. But you're also part of an eternal family as well. And in the Bible, we find out that raising children and investing in the next generation is not just the job of the biological family, but of that larger spiritual community as well. And so just by virtue of the fact that you're part of a church and part of this church, you're a part of this process of raising up the next generation. In fact, this Psalm 127, is a psalm of ascent, as I said. And so as they would make their way to Jerusalem, they would all sing this together. It wasn't just the parents, okay? It was the entire community of Israel. They would say these words or sing these words together because they understood that they all had a responsibility to the next generation, and we do as well. As a church, we all need to feel the responsibility and bear the weight of responsibility for passing on our faith and values to the next generation. So, all that to say, this isn't a message just for parents, it's for all of us. Number 2 thing I need to say right up front is this, that I'm not an expert on parenting. And I say this because sometimes people assume that whenever you teach on something, you're an expert on that subject. Or they assume that you think you're an expert on that subject. And I can assure you that neither of those 2 things is true about me. You can just ask my kids. In fact, true story, on Wednesday nights I've been teaching a class at our Dixon City campus on parenting for some parents of teenagers. And my 16-year-old daughter last week, she said, "Dad, what's that class you're teaching? What's that class on?" And I said, "Well, honey, it's on parenting." And she laughed. It was very good natured, but she laughed nonetheless. So all that to say, I'm not an expert on parenting, but that's okay because we're going to be looking to God's Word for wisdom on this one, not to me. Number 3, I just need to say this, there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees. There's no parenting strategy that I can give to you that will guarantee great kids, because there is not such a strategy. Because even in the very best home with the most committed parents, there are times when kids will walk away from everything they have learned. There are no guarantees because every human being has 2 things, a free will and a sin nature. And so you have great influence if you're a parent, tremendous influence, but you cannot control another human being, and so there are no guarantees. But I'll tell you where I find peace, where I find rest. I find rest in knowing this, that if I'm willing to follow God's wisdom as a parent, then I can lay my head on the pillow at night, knowing that I've done what He's called me to do, and that's the very best I can do. And then I can entrust my kids into His hands, okay? So having said all of that, not just a message for parents, I'm not an expert, but God is, and there are no guarantees. Let me jump in, and let me just, as I begin, give you kind of a summary statement that I think summarizes everything in Psalm 127 and everything that I'm hoping to communicate to you in the next few minutes. In fact, if you want to write this down, there's a great spot to take notes on the back of that connection card. And if you don't write anything else down, write this down. That what we leave to our children is not nearly as important as what we leave in them. See, I was thinking about this a few weeks ago because I had to fill out some paperwork for a life insurance policy. And, you know, whenever you're dealing with a life insurance policy, that's like a stark reminder of your own mortality, isn't it? It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to die someday. And someday I'm going to be gone, and someday my wife is going to be gone, and eventually all of our material possessions will be inherited by our kids, and it probably won't be very much. But the truth is, what we leave to our children is not nearly as important as what we leave in them, in their hearts. And if I think as a parent, you know, my hope and my wish for my kids and my hope for us as a church as we think about the next generation is that we would leave 3 things in the hearts of the next generation. And here's the first thing that we need to leave them. Number 1, I think we need to leave them a strong faith. That may be the best gift that we can give our kids and give the next generation. Listen again how Psalm 127 begins. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain." In other words, it's saying this, that unless you bring God into the building of your house, into the building of your family, and unless you involve Him in the protection, the watching over of your family, what you do will be in vain. Because what we need in order to have a strong family is a strong faith. I think many parents have what I would call a Beatles philosophy of parenting, which says all you need is love. Like if you just love your kids like crazy, then everything is going to be okay. Now, I would not deny that we need to love our kids. We need to give them unconditional love. But that's not all that we need to give them. We also need to give them a moral and spiritual compass to help them navigate life. That we not only need to show our kids the heart of God, we also need to show our kids the mind of God as well. You see, you can give your kids unconditional love. You can give the best health care out there. You can enroll them in the best private school. You can get them involved in all kinds of activities, and all those things are great. But if you don't give them a strong faith, then you haven't really given your kids what they really need for life. You know, if you've been around here for 4 or 5 years, you've probably heard me talk about a fascinating study that was done in the early 1900s. There was a team of sociologists that actually tried to calculate the implications of a strong faith, especially a strong faith that gets handed down from generation to generation. And what they did was they studied the descendants of 2 different men who both lived in the 18th century. The first man was a man by the name of Max Jukes. And he was a man who had rejected Christianity, had no time for God. He was a man who really lived a life of crime, and he handed that down to his descendants. And so they studied 1,200 of his descendants. And of those 1,200 descendants, they discovered 280 vagrants, 128 public prostitutes, 130 convicted criminals, 100 alcoholics, 60 habitual thieves, 7 murderers. And of the 20 who learned a trade, 10 of them learned it in a state prison. That was his legacy to the world. Now, in contrast to that, there was a man who lived right around the same time. His name was Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards was a pastor. He was a writer. For a period of time, he was the president of Princeton University. Jonathan Edwards married Sarah, and Jonathan and Sarah Edwards had 11 children. And they poured their lives, and they poured their hearts, and they poured their faith into their children. And then they studied, the same team studied the descendants of Jonathan Edwards, and here's what they discovered. They discovered that of his descendants, there were 300 pastors and missionaries, 120 college professors, 60 doctors, 60 authors, 30 judges, 14 college presidents, 3 U.S. congressmen, and 1 vice president of the United States. You see, a strong faith is a powerful thing to pass on because it has an effect not just on the next generation, but on generation and generation and generation to come. That is the impact of a strong faith. And I think that's one of the best gifts we can give our kids. Now, when it comes to leaving in the hearts of our kids a strong faith, the church has a part to play in that. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the greater weight of responsibility, I believe, is actually on the shoulders of us as parents. It really is. In fact, if you go back toward the beginning of the Bible, the book of Deuteronomy, there's this scene where Moses is speaking to the people of Israel. They've just come through the wilderness. They're about to go into the promised land. And just before they go in, he's reminding them of what they will need to do in this new home, this new place that they've been given. And in verse 5 of chapter 6, he says this to the people. He says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." Then he says, "These commands that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up." Do you see the picture here? It's the picture of parents engaging in spiritual conversations with their kids in the everyday flow of life, praying together with them, learning together with them. It's describing a faith that's not confined to an hour on Sunday, but a faith that is woven through the ebb and flow of family life. And I want you to notice something here. It says, these commands are to first be on your hearts and then impress them on your children. It always begins with what we do, not with what we say as parents, because you cannot impart what you do not possess. I came across this statement from C.J. Mahaney. He said this. He said, "Effective parenting involves explaining to our children what they are already seeing in our lives." I mean, just let that sink in. That is so convicting, isn't it? Do you know what that tells me? That tells me that the biggest factor in whether or not my kids adopt my faith and my values is not my ability to articulate it. It's my ability to live it. It's not what they hear me say. It's what they see me do. That's where it all begins. That's where a strong faith begins, is with the way that we live. And then throughout our everyday lives as parents, we just weave that into our conversations and our interactions. On your seat as you came in today, on every campus, there's a card, and on that card is that first verse, Psalm 127:1. It's just a reminder, and especially if you're a parent, but even if you've got influence in the lives of kids, the next generation, just keep this as a reminder that God must be front and center in our families if we're ever going to pass on a strong faith. Now, some of you might be saying, "Well, Mark, that sounds good, but you don't understand. It's too late for me. See, I've already raised my kids, and when I was raising my kids, I wanted nothing to do with God. It's too late for me." And let me say this to you. It's never too late. It's never too late to go back to your kids and say to your son, to say to your daughter, "Listen, when I was raising you, I really didn't have a handle on what it meant to be a follower of Christ, but I just want you to know I understand that now, and I'd love to talk to you someday about what I'm learning, and I hope you see that in my life." It's never too late. Now, some of you would say, "You know what, I'd love to pass on a strong faith to the next generation, but I'm not sure I have a strong faith. In fact, I'm not sure I have any faith at all." Let me give you a really good next step if that describes you. We've got a class that starts next week. It's called Starting Point. It's going to be 8 Sunday mornings, 11:15, right on the campus that you're attending. And Starting Point is a great place for you if you're a seeker, if you're a skeptic, if you're just coming back to church for the first time in a long time. It's a place where you can get your questions answered about God and the Bible and Christianity. And if you don't really have much that you can pass on to your kids or pass on to the next generation, I'd say begin starting point next Sunday, because that will begin to give you what you need to pass on, okay? So it's not what we leave to our kids. It's what we leave in our kids, in their hearts. And the first thing I think we need to give them is a strong faith. Now, let me keep reading here. Verse 2, listen to this. It says, "In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves." And what this is describing is it's describing a life that is filled with nonstop activity, rising early, staying up late, toiling just to meet the demands of life. In fact, if this were written today, because this was written, to a different world, 2,500 years ago, but I think if this were written to Americans in 2016, it may say something like this: "In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, a mortgage payment, 3 cars, a cell phone plan, a cable TV subscription, and Disney vacations." Or it might say something like this: "In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling to get your kids to soccer practice, piano lessons, dance class, and SAT prep." It's describing, in verse 2, a life that's driven by activity, constantly moving from one thing to the next, but ignoring the most important things in life. I recently heard somebody describe American culture and American parenting this way: that we are raising our kids to be experience rich, but relationship poor. And here's what that means. We have somehow come to believe in our culture that the secret to raising great kids is to give them all kinds of activities and experiences. And so we fill their lives with lessons and classes and activities and clubs, and we keep them moving all the time, feeling like we're going to deprive them if we don't. But the trade-off is that our families become so busy and so scattered that we just kind of skim through relationships. We hydroplane through relationships. And we end up raising kids who are experience rich. I mean, they get to do a lot of stuff, but they are relationship poor. But here's what I believe. I believe that when our kids are grown and gone, the thing that they're going to need the most is not the experiences they remember, but the relationships that they still have. So if I could encourage you to give another gift to your kids or to the next generation, and a gift that I want to give to my kids, it's this. It's the gift of life-giving relationships. Life-giving relationships. Just slowing down long enough to invest in them myself, and also to make sure that other people are investing in them as well. Because I want to talk about life-giving relationships in 2 worlds. And first of all, our homes. Go back to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Let me just read this again. Talk about them, God's commands, when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Do you hear the kind of lifestyle that's describing? That's describing the kind of lifestyle where you actually sit down at home, have a meaningful conversation, where you actually go for a walk in the neighborhood and catch up with your spouse or with your kids, or when you sit down on your son or daughter's bed before they go to sleep at night and just have a conversation with them about their day and pray with them, or you get up in the morning and you have a cup of coffee together, you have breakfast together. This pace of life that is so foreign to us sometimes as Americans. And I'll be honest with you, I think this would be one of my greatest regrets in parenting, and my parenting years are moving by very quickly and are going to come to a close within a few years, at least having my kids at home. But I look back, and I was so busy, and yet I look back and I recognize that some of the best conversations I ever had with my kids, some of the most meaningful moments, were in those unplanned, unscheduled times, just riding in the car, just walking down the street, just sitting on my daughter's bed at night, just talking. And that's the thing. You never know when those moments are going to come along. And if you're always moving at such a fast pace that you can't stop, then you never experience those moments. And I think one of the best gifts that we can give to our kids, one of the things that we can leave in their hearts, is life-giving relationships. First of all, at home. But secondly, I think we need to give them life-giving relationships among God's people as well, in the church. I say all the time that Debbie and I love this church, and I would attend this church, we would attend this church even if I didn't work here, because we love this church. And one of the reasons we love this church, and there are many reasons, but one of them is because of the impact that it's had on the hearts of our kids. And when I talk about the impact of this church on our kids, I'm not talking about them sitting in here in a room listening to me talk, okay? That's not it. I'm talking about relationships that they built, not just with their friends, but with their small group leaders, with mentors, with other adults that they serve alongside. And I'll tell you what, it's a huge blessing as a parent to have so many people involved in the lives of my kids who are saying the same things to them that I'm saying to them. Because let me tell you what happens if you haven't gotten here yet. When your kids get older, there comes a point when they begin to look to other people for advice and look to other people for approval. It's just a natural part of growing up. I've seen that happen with my kids. I think sometimes I'm almost an embarrassment to them when they're around other people. But there comes that point when your kids look to other people for advice and for affirmation. And when that happens, you want to make sure that you have the right people around them in terms of their peers, in terms of their mentors. And I'm so thankful to be a part of a church where so many people have built into the hearts of my kids. And there'll be times, where I'll be talking to my kids, and one of my daughters will say, "Dad, you'll never believe what so-and-so told me." And she'll tell me, what one of her small group leaders said, and she'll say, "Dad, she told me that, da-da-da-da-da." And I'll think to myself, I've told you that 100 times. But you didn't listen to me. Now, I don't say that out loud, because here's the deal. Sometimes our kids need to hear the same thing from someone else in a different way. And I'll tell you what, I'm so thankful to have people in the lives of my kids surrounding them who will say what I would say, but just say it in a different way and in a way that they're going to hear. Let me give you a verse about relationships that I think is so clear and so simple. It's from Proverbs chapter 13. It says, "He who walks with the wise will be wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm." I've heard it said this way: you show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And one of the best gifts that we can give to our kids is the gift of life-giving relationships with wise people. Surround them with people in the body of Christ who will speak into their hearts and into their lives in a life-giving way. And what some of you think as parents is you think, but Mark, I bring my kids to church and they sit and they listen to you and they like it. But listen, it doesn't say he who listens to the wise will be wise. It says he who walks with the wise will be wise. It's about building relationships, not about attending a church service. There was a study that was done by Lifeway Research, and they discovered this, that teenagers who had 5 or more adults from the church investing in them during the ages of 15 to 18 were far less likely to leave their faith after high school, because those relationships become the glue that pulls them back. And let me say something here. And this is going to sound, self-promoting or self-interested, and you just have to believe that there is not an ounce of self-promotion in this. But if you're a parent, especially if you're a parent, I plead with you, I beg you to prioritize involvement in the life of a healthy church for your family, for the sake of your kid and the relationships that child is going to need. And that's not a matter of intentions, it's a matter of calendar. It's a matter of choosing it over everything else, because I'll tell you what, that has been one of the greatest blessings in my life as a parent, is the relationships that my kids have in this place. In fact, let me give you an opportunity. Coming up this weekend, if you're a parent of a middle or high school student, we got a fall retreat coming up this weekend. We got about 150 middle and high school students that are going to be boarding some coach buses on Friday and heading out for a couple of days. It's going to be a ton of fun and huge spiritual impact. If you've got kids in middle or high school and they aren't signed up yet, I would sign them up. There's a web address here where you can go for signups. And you might say, well, I'd love to have them go, but I can't afford it. We will help you with that. You might say, well, my kids don't have any friends. They don't know anybody. Believe me, they will when the weekend is over, and they're going to have a blast. You might say, well, we got a schedule conflict. Maybe your son or daughter has a football game or a cross-country meet. Make a hard choice. Prioritize their spiritual well-being. And for non-parents, let me give you a way that you can be a part of this too, because like I said earlier, this isn't just a message for parents, because I think we all bear the responsibility for the next generation. We're still looking for 5 people who can come, get on the bus, spend the weekend with 150 sweaty teenagers and help out in the kitchen. It'll be a blast. So if you want to help with that, just take that connection card, let us know that you want to volunteer this weekend in the kitchen. Or we have families, like I said, who can't afford to go, and you might be able to help provide some scholarships. Maybe you don't have kids, or you've raised your kids. If you can do that, let us know on that connection card, because this is something that all of us need to care about. Okay? So, it's not so much what we leave to our kids that matters, it's what we leave in them, it's what we leave in their hearts. So we need to leave in them a strong faith. We also need to leave in them life-giving relationships. And I just want to give you one more that comes out of Psalm 127. I think we need to give our kids, we need to give this next generation the gift of a compelling vision for their lives. Listen to what it goes on to say. Verse 3, children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born into one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. This is just such a powerful word picture. I mean, think about this. What is an arrow for? An arrow is taken by a soldier, and it's aimed, and it's released, and it flies into enemy territory to hopefully contribute to the winning of a battle. So if you're a parent, I think you've got to ask yourself a very sobering question. And the question is this: why has God given me these children? Why has he entrusted me with these kids? And I'll tell you what, God doesn't give us children so that we can accessorize our lives. He gives us kids so that we can train them up for the mission, point them in the right direction, and then release them to make their mark in this world. And I think one of the best gifts that we can give to the next generation, to help them understand the story, the bigger story that God is writing in this world, and the part that they might be able to play in it. We need to invite our kids in the next generation to dream the dreams that God may have for them. Because I think so often we have such a limited vision and such a small story that we call our kids to. Oftentimes, it goes something like this, son or daughter, I just want you to grow up and go to a good college, hopefully on a sports scholarship, get a great job with good pay, settle down, live a nice middle-class American life, and give me grandchildren. It's not a very compelling vision. It's no wonder that sometimes our kids walk away from our faith, because that's the best we can offer them. There's a great book that you should read if you're a parent. It's called Parenting Beyond Your Capacity. Excellent book. We give a lot of copies of this away. But in this book, I want you to hear what the authors say. It says this: the mission of the family is not ultimately to protect your children, but to mobilize them to demonstrate God's love to a broken world. It's possible to hang on to our kids so tightly that we forget the ultimate goal of parenting is letting go. We're fine if our children never climb a mountain as long as it guarantees they never get hurt. But what if your children were made for the mountains? We got to give them a compelling vision. Many of you know that my oldest daughter, when she was in her senior year of high school, she decided that before she went off to college, she just wanted to take a year to serve other people. And so she signed up to spend 9 months in South Africa. This is a picture of her when she was over there in South Africa. And we didn't encourage this. We didn't know anything about it until she came and told us about it. It was her idea. And when she first told me about it, I was encouraging that. I thought, man, that's a big vision. That's a big dream. I was excited for her. I was also a little bit afraid for her. And as the summer went on, and as she got closer to her departure date, the fear in my heart became even greater, because at that time there was a raging Ebola epidemic in Western Africa. And now that was a long ways away from where she was going to be, but still as a dad, you think about that. And she was going to South Africa, which is a country with one of the highest crime rates in the world, and where 1 out of every 5 adults is HIV positive. And what made it even more difficult was as I began to tell people about her plans, because people knew she had graduated from high school, and they said, well, what's Leah going to do next year? And I would tell them. And so many people would say, wow, you're going to let her do that? And the fear just began to creep into my heart. And I'll never forget, it was toward the end of the summer, we were just kind of packing her up so she could go. And I had to run to a store to get some last-minute things that she needed. And on the way home from the store, I was in my car, didn't have the radio on, it was kind of quiet. And the fear came up in my heart, almost a sense of panic, and I actually began to cry, and I pulled over, and I just had to pray, and I had to pray a prayer of surrender. And I had to remind myself that my daughter is an arrow that God has crafted to fly in the enemy's direction, and if I hold on to her, then she'll never do what she was called to do. And she went, she had a great experience, it was a blessing to the people of South Africa, and it changed her completely. You see, if you want to really keep your kids connected to the heart of God, you've got to connect them to the mission of God for their lives. So let me say it one more time in closing. What we leave to our children, not nearly as important as what we leave in them. And I think we need to leave in them a strong faith and life-giving relationships and a compelling vision for the future. Now, if you're a parent, you know what you need to do, but even if you're not a parent, listen, you're not off the hook. You may not have kids in your home, but you have kids in your sphere of influence, maybe as a grandparent, as an aunt, as an uncle. And maybe if nothing else, you can serve in our kids' ministry and make a difference here. And I got to tell you, I'm so thankful for the volunteers who serve in our kids' ministry. In fact, I brought a t-shirt up here with me today. When you walk around, whatever campus you're on, this is the t-shirts that you see our children's ministry and student ministry volunteers wear. When you see somebody wearing this t-shirt, just walk up to them and say thank you. Thank you for serving. Thank you for investing in the next generation. And while you're talking to them, maybe you can ask them how you can get a t-shirt too and be a part of that team, okay? All right, let's wrap up. I just want to close with allowing you to hear the story of a man in our church who decided that he needed to make an investment in the heart and in the life of his son, and at great expense to himself, both in terms of time and money. He found a way to do that. I want you to hear the story of Dave and his son Joe. Watch this with me.
For me, it was kind of a personal goal overcoming a business goal. My business goals were on one side, and I put my personal goals on the other side. And one of them was to hike the trail, and I realized that I was 50. I wanted to do it with my son. We've always kind of wanted to do some type of adventure like this. And what was going on in Joe's life was not a motivation, but I think it was a part of the grand plan.
I was living in Denver, Colorado, and I was a cook out there. I was just living with buddies, like a bunch of college kids, kind of like a frat boy kind of house. I got a call from my dad, and he told me he was selling this business, and he wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail with me. And it's been a dream of ours since I was a really young kid, and he always took me backpacking, and it was kind of our thing, our way to connect as like father and son. And so I said, yeah, I'll do it, and I quit my job and came back to PA. A couple trips to REI, and we were on the trail. When we first started in Springer Mountain, Georgia, the first night out, we stayed on top of a mountain called Sassafras Mountain, and it was freezing cold and the wind was blowing, and we just thought we were gonna die, and we hiked 12 miles that day and couldn't sleep, and just shivering in our bags all night, and I thought, what the heck did I get myself into?
Especially in the beginning, I didn't know if I could physically do it. I was exhausted, so exhausted I was almost sick to my stomach, and I literally didn't know if I was going to survive the night. Joe was scared that would my heart take it.
When you think about like the enormity of what you undertook, especially that first day, it's overwhelming, you know? Just the thought that you are hiking from Georgia to Maine, and to kind of comprehend that, it's just kind of really scary, a lot of fear, you know, especially the first couple weeks.
There's also this feeling of dread for people will tell you what's coming up and how hard it's going to be.
Being apart from society for so long and being, you know, getting lonely, stupid things like that I'd be scared of when I'm going to bed at night.
You do get anxious as you're going along of what's next, so whether I could stay the course. It can't be one person's thing or another person's thing. It has to be both persons. Otherwise, there's so much hardship, it would, I think, pull them apart.
Around my senior year of high school, I kind of fell off the radar and like started disconnecting myself from my family, getting involved with the wrong people. Me and my dad always had a good relationship growing up, that was really tough for us, I think, and just that disconnect there, that we didn't have our relationship anymore, it hurt, you know. This trip has given me the chance to reconnect with my dad and be good friends and have a good relationship again.
He's pretty open to talk about many of the things in life. I learned that he cares about our relationship. He cares how we're getting along, you know, and he cares how I'm feeling and whether I'm going to live or die, you know, on some of the really bad days on the trail.
There was one time when me and my dad split up, probably like a week into when I was by myself. It just started thunderstorming on top of this mountain in the Shenandoahs. I just took my shirt off and just went into the rain, and it was storming. The thunder was crashing all around me, and instead of being afraid, I just embraced it, and I actually just started like laughing like crazy. Like I was just like so happy and full of joy, and there's like this storm around me. I just started crying tears of joy, because it felt like the first time I felt, you know, God in a very long time. And then you know, more things along the trail kind of confirmed that feeling, that, you know, God was still there, and he was still fighting for me and working to get me back.